The season is definitely upon us, is it not? Your body starts to shiver, for no mere mortal can resist the evil of the thriller. Oh, yeah. Okay, so here's the thing, guys. Right after St. Patrick's Day in March is when I start prepping Halloween stories for y'all. And sometimes I don't get it all done until the last minute. When I reread tonight's story, I realized it was going to come up a bit short of the hour. I'm sorry. Now, I understand that's bad form for Halloween tales. And so we will have a second story immediately following the first one, which will take us about 20 minutes or so past the hour. There we go. That's more good form for Halloween tales. I hope you approve of this decision. If you need to take off after the first story, remember you can catch both stories and many more on the Storylink Radio YouTube channel. Mwah. And so tonight's stories are going to be Sticks, a Lovecraftian psychedelic gothic horror tale, which is a precursor to the Blair Witch Project. Followed by Leaves. A woman with a phobia of autumn leaves is faced with her worst fear as she tries to survive an alien invasion on Halloween night. Come explore your philophobia with us. Sticks and Leaves. Cute, huh? Great name for two stories. Storytelling Countdown to Halloween continues on Storylink Radio YouTube channel. Thank you guys for visiting. I'm seeing lots of comments and views and stuff. Fabulous. 31 days in October and 31 stories, a new one every night, counting down to the big day. There's a link right there in local chat. We are presenting in live voice and stream and live on YouTube tonight. Okay, yeah, good. Live, undead. I don't know. Tomato, tomato. Tell your real life grid friends to come watch tonight's stories with you at the Storylink Radio YouTube channel. Link in local chat. We're both in Second Life at the Seanchai Library and Storylink Radio Estate in Kitely, Opensim. Here in Kitely, we're at the Far Away, kind of a creepy little autumn fields and stuff. And all my brothers are here with me. We have a chat link between the grids so you can chat with your friends on the other grid. All sessions at the Seanchai Library are, and Storylink Radio for that matter, are presented freely. There is never, ever, 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 never, not even then, any obligation to tip. However, if you have the means and you're so inclined to show your appreciation for the work we present here, and yeah, it's a lot of fun and we really thoroughly enjoy it, but it's work too. Look at Caledonia. She works 27 hours a day sometimes. Anyway, we welcome you to join us in support of our featured charities. At Seanchai, there is a yellow and black bee-striped donation jar sitting on a big green box somewhere over my left shoulder for Riff. Reading is fundamental. Riff is committed to a literate America by inspiring a passion for reading to give every child the fundamentals for success. Here in Kitely, there's a treasure chest, and we welcome you to join us in support of Samaritan's Purse, providing emergency aid to victims of fire, tornadoes, hurricanes, and other disasters. Disasters in this world? Oh, please. Link in local chat for that if you want to know more about Samaritan's Purse. But again, and I stress and I reiterate, there's never, ever, 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 ever any obligation to do so. You can learn more about our events and keep track of our various virtual doings at our website, www.seanchailibrary.com. And I would expect everyone here already knows that, but Seanchai, of course, is the Irish for storyteller. And also at storylingradio.com. Links in local chat for that. Whew, wow, what a lot of links in local chat. We do ask there be no capturing of this voice presentation by any means without checking with us first, please. But we always welcome your participation in type chat comments during the stories, both in the virtual world and on our YouTube channel. Hey, I see people talking on the YouTube channel right now. So let's see. What are we supposed to do now? Oh, yeah, I know. On with the stories. That's it. Have a drink first. Now, there is I don't know, far too much information regarding the connections between Blair Witch Project and this precursor short story. But if you're interested in that sort of thing, you may want to give it a look later. So, on with the story. Oh, yeah, this is by Carl Edward Wagner, who also wrote our first story we presented back in September called In the Pines. This one's called Sticks. And if you listen very carefully, you can hear the very special effects I have of crickets in the background. The lashed together framework of sticks jutted from a small cairn alongside the stream. Colin Leverett studied it in perplexity. Half a dozen odd lengths of branch wired together at cross angles for no fathomable purpose. It reminded him unpleasantly of some bizarre crucifix, and he wondered what might lie in the cairn beneath. It was spring of 1942, the kind of day to make the war seem distant and unreal, although the draft notice waited on his desk. In a few days, Leverett would lock his rural studio and wondered if he would ever see it again. And if he did, if he'd even be able to use its pens and brushes and carving tools if and when he did return. So it was goodbye to the woods and streams of upstate New York, too. No fly rods, no tramps through the countryside in Hitler's Europe, no point in putting off fishing that trout stream he had driven past once, exploring the back roads of the Otselic Valley. Man Brook. So it was marked on the old geological survey map, ran southeast of De Ruyter. The unfrequented country road crossed over a stone bridge, old before the first horseless carriage. But Leverett's old Ford eased across and onto the shoulder. Taking fly rod and tackle, he included a pocket flask, and he tied an iron skillet to his belt optimistically. He'd work his way downstream for a few miles, he figured. By afternoon, he'd lunch on fresh trout, maybe some fat bullfrog legs. Morbid. It was a fine, clear stream, though difficult to fish, as dense bushes hung out from the bank, broken with stretches of open water, hard to work without being seen. But the trout rose boldly to his fly, and Leverett was in fine spirits. From the bridge, the valley along Man Brook began as fairly open pasture, but half a mile downstream, the land had fallen into disuse and was thick with second-growth evergreens and scrub apple trees. Another mile, and the scrub merged with the dense forest, which continued unbroken. The land here, he had learned, had been taken over by the state many years back. As Leverett followed the stream, he noted remains of an old railroad embankment. No vestige of tracks or ties, just the embankment itself, overgrown with large trees. The artist rejoiced in the beautiful drywall culverts spanning the stream as it wound through the valley. To his mind, it seemed eerie, this forgotten railroad running straight and true through virtual wilderness. He could imagine an old wood burner with a conical stack steaming along through the valley, dragging 2 or 3 wooden coaches. It must be a branch of the old Oswego Midland Railroad, he decided, abandoned rather suddenly in the 1870s. Leverett, who had a memory for detail, knew of it from a story his grandfather told of riding the line in 1871 from Otselic to De Ruyter on his honeymoon. The engine had so labored up the steep grade over Crum Hill that he got off to walk alongside. Probably that sharp grade was the reason for the line's abandonment. When he came across a scrap of board nailed to several sticks set into a stone wall, his darkest thought was that it might read no trespassing. Curiously, though, the board was weathered featureless. The nails seemed quite new, however. Leverett scarcely gave it a thought, until a short distance beyond he came upon another such contrivance, and then another. Now he scratched at the day's stubble along his long jaw. This didn't really make any sense. A prank? But on whom? A child's game? No, the arrangement of this, the wood and the little figures was far too sophisticated. As an artist, Leverett appreciated the craftsmanship of the work, the calculated angles and lengths, the designed intricacy of the maddeningly inexplicable devices. There was something distinctly uncomfortable about their effect. Leverett reminded himself that he had come here to fish and continued downstream, but as he worked along and around a thicket, he again stopped in puzzlement. Here was a small open space with more of the stick lattices and an arrangement of flat stones, too, lied out on the ground. The stones, likely taken from one of the Many drywall culverts made a pattern maybe 20 by 15 feet that at first glance resembled a ground plan for a house. Intrigued, Leverett quickly saw that this was not so. If the ground plan for anything would have to be for a small maze. The bizarre lattice structures were all around, sticks from trees and bits of board nailed together in a fantastic array. They defied description, really. No two seemed alike. Some were only one or two straight sticks lashed together in parallel or angles. Others were worked into complicated lattices of dozens of sticks and boards. One could have been a child's treehouse that was built in 3 planes and was so abstract and useless it could have been nothing more than an insane conglomeration of sticks and wire. Sometimes these little contrivances were stuck in a pile of stones or a wall, maybe thrust into the railroad embankment or even nailed to a tree. It should have been ridiculous. It wasn't. Instead, it seemed somehow sinister. These utterly inexplicable, meticulously constructed stick lattices spread through a wilderness where only a tree-grown embankment or a forgotten stone wall gave evidence that man had ever passed through. Leverett forgot now about trout and frog legs. Instead, he dug into his pockets for a notebook and a stub of pencil. Busily, he began to sketch the more intricate structures. Perhaps someone could explain them. Perhaps it was something to their insane complexity that warranted close study for his own work. Leverett was roughly 2 miles now from the bridge when he came upon the ruins of a house. It was an unlovely colonial farmhouse, box-shaped, gambrel-roofed, fast falling into the ground, really. The windows were dark and empty. The chimneys on either end looked ready to topple. Rafters showed through open spaces in the roof, and the weathered boards of the walls had in places rotted away to reveal hewn timber beams. The foundation was stone and disproportionately massive. From the size of these unmortared stone blocks, its builder had intended the foundation to stand forever. The house was nearly swallowed up by undergrowth and rampant lilac bushes, but Leverett could distinguish what had been a lawn with imposing shade trees at some point. Farther back were gnarled and sickly apple trees, an overgrown garden where a few lost flowers still bloomed, wan and serpentine from years in the wild. The stick lattices were everywhere. The lawn, the trees, even the house was covered with the uncanny structures. They reminded Leverett of a 100 misshapen spider webs grouped so closely together as to almost ensnare the entire house and clearing. Wondering, he sketched page on page of them as he cautiously approached the abandoned house. He wasn't certain just what he expected to find inside that house. The aspect of the farmhouse was frankly menacing, standing as it did in gloomy desolation where the forest had devoured the works of man, where the only sign that man had been here in a century were these insanely wrought lattice works of sticks and board. Some less noble souls may have turned back at this point, perhaps wiser souls. But Leverett, whose fascination for the macabre was evident in his art, instead was intrigued. He drew a rough sketch of the farmhouse and grounds he overrun with the enigmatic devices, with thickets of hedges and distorted flowers. He regretted that it might be years before he could capture the eeriness of the place on sketchboard or canvas. The door was off its hinges, and Leverett gingerly stepped within, hoping that the flooring remained sound enough to bear his sparse frame. The afternoon sun pierced the empty windows, mottling the decaying floorboards with great blotches of light. Dust drifted in the sunlight. The house was empty, stripped of furnishings other than indistinct tangles of rubble mounted over with decay and the drifted leaves of many seasons. Someone had been here, though, and recently. Someone who had literally covered the mildewed walls with diagrams of the mysterious lattice structures. The drawings were applied directly to the walls, crisscrossing the rotting wallpaper and crumbling plaster in bold black lines. Some of the vertiginous complexity covered up an entire wall, really like a mad mural. Others were small, only a few crossed lines, and reminded Leverett of uniform glyphics. His pencil hurried over the pages of his notebook. Leverett noted with fascination that a number of the drawings were recognizable as schematics of lattices he had early sketched. Was this then the planning room for the madman or educated idiot who had built these structures? The gouges etched by the charcoal into the soft plaster appeared fresh. done days or months ago, perhaps. A darkened doorway opened into the cellar. Were there drawings down there as well? And what else? Leverett wondered if he should dare it, really. Except for the streamers of light that crept through the cracks in the flooring, the cellar was in near total darkness. Hello? He called. And anyone here? Hmm. Somehow it didn't seem silly just then. These stick lattices hardly seemed the work of a rational mind. Leverett was not enthusiastic about the prospect of encountering such a person in this dark cellar. It occurred to him that virtually anything might transpire here, and no one in the entire world of 1942 would ever know. That in itself was too great a fascination for one of Leverett's temperament. Carefully, he started down those cellar stairs. They were stone and thus solid, but treacherous with moss and debris. The cellar was enormous, even more so in the darkness. Leverett reached the foot of the steps and paused for his eyes to adjust to the damp gloom. An earlier impression recurred to him. The cellar was somehow too big for the house, really. Had another dwelling stood here originally, perhaps destroyed and rebuilt by one of lesser fortune? He examined the stonework. Here were great blocks of gneiss that might support a castle. On a closer look, they reminded him of a fortress, for the drywall technique was startlingly Messinian. Like the house above, the cellar appeared to be empty, although without light, Leverett could not be certain what the shadows hid. There seemed to be darker areas of shadow along sections of the foundation wall, suggesting openings to chambers beyond. Leverett began to feel uneasy in spite of himself. There was something here, a large table-like bulk in the center of the cellar, where a few ghosts of sunlight drifted down to touch its edges. It seemed to be of stone. Cautiously, he crossed the stone paving to where it loomed, waist-high, maybe 8 feet long, less wide. A roughly shaped slab of gneiss, he wondered, he judged, and supported by pillars of unmortared stone. In the darkness, he could get only a vague conception of the object. He ran its hand along the slab. It seemed to have a groove along its edge. His groping fingers encountered fabric, something cold and leathery and unyielding. Mildewed harness, he guessed in distaste. And then something closed on his wrist, set icy nails into his flesh. Leverett screamed and lunged away with frantic strength. He was held fast, but the object on the stone slab pulled upward. A sickly beam of sunlight came down to touch one end of the table. It was enough. As Leverett struggled backward and the thing that held him heaved up from the stone table, its face passed through the beam of light. It was a lich's face, desiccated flesh tight over its skull. Filthy strands of hair were matted over its scalp. Tattered lips were drawn back away from broken yellow teeth, and sunken in their socket eyes that should be dead were bright with hideous life. Leverett screamed again, desperate with fear. His free hand clawed the iron skillet tied to his belt. Ripping it loose, he smashed at the nightmarish face with all his strength. For one frozen instant of horror, the sunlight let him see the skillet crush through the mold-eaten forehead like an axe, cleaving the dry flesh and brittle bone. The grip on his wrist failed. The cadaverous face fell away, and the sight of its caved-in forehead and unblinking eyes, from between which thick blood had begun to ooze, would awaken Leverett from nightmares on countless nights to come. But now Leverett tore free and fled, and when his aching legs faltered as he plunged headlong through the scrub growth, he was spurred to desperate energy by the memory of the footsteps that had stumbled up the cellar stairs behind him. When Corlett Leverett returned from the war, his friends marked him a changed man. There were streaks of gray in Leverett's hair. His springy step had slowed. The athletic leanness of his body had withered to an unhealthy gauntness. There were indelible lines to his face, and his eyes were haunted. More disturbing was an alteration of temperament, a modern cynicism that eroded his earlier air of whimsical asceticism. His fascination with the macabre had assumed a darker mood, a morbid obsession that his old acquaintances found disquieting. But after all, it had been that kind of war, hadn't it? Especially those who had fought through the Apennines. Leverett might have told them otherwise had he cared to discuss his nightmarish experience on Man Brook. But Leverett kept his own counsel, and when he grimly recalled that the creature he had struggled with in the abandoned cellar, he usually convinced himself it had only been a derelict, a crazy hermit whose appearance had been distorted by the poor light in his own wild imagination. He convinced himself, too, his blow had been no more than glanced off the man's forehead, he reasoned, since the other had recovered quickly enough to give chase, after all, up the stairs. Anyway, it was best not to dwell upon such matters, and this rational explanation helped restore sanity when Leverett woke from nightmares of that face still. And thus Colin Leverett returned to his studio and once more plied his pens and brushes and carving knives. The pulp magazines, where fans had acclaimed his work before the war, welcomed him back with long lists of assignments. There were commissions from galleries and collectors and unfinished sculptures and wooden models. Leverett busied himself now. There were problems now. Short stories returned to cover painting as too grotesque. The publishers of a new anthology of horror stories sent back a pair of his interior drawings. Too gruesome, especially the rotted, bloated faces of those hanged men, they wrote. A customer returned a silver figurine explaining the martyred saint was too thoroughly martyred. Even Weird Tales magazine, after heralding his return to its ghoul-haunted pages, began returning illustrations to him that they considered too strong even for our readers. Leverett tried half-heartedly to tone things down, found the results vapid, uninspired. Eventually, the assignments stopped trickling in. Leverett, becoming more the recluse as years went by, dismissed the pulp days from his mind. Working quietly in his isolated studio, he found a living doing occasional commissioned pieces and gallery work, from time to time selling a painting or a sculpture to the major museums. Critics had much praise for his bizarre abstract sculptures. The war was 25 years history now, when Colin Leverett received a letter from a good friend of the pulp days, Prescott Brandon, now editor-publisher of Gothic House, a small press that specialized in books of the weird fantasy genre. I have some books from them. Despite a lapse in correspondence of many years, Brandon's letter began in his typically direct style. To the macabre hermit of the Midlands, the Erie, Salem, Massachusetts, August 2nd. Colin, my friend, I'm putting together a deluxe 3-volume collection of H. Kenneth Allard's horror stories. I well recall that Kent's stories were a personal favorite of yours, were they not? How about shambling forth from your retirement and illustrating these for me? We'll need 2 colored jackets and a dozen line interiors each. Would hope that you can startle fandom with some especially ghastly drawings for these, Something different from the hackneyed skulls and bats and werewolves carting off half-dressed ladies, you know? If you're interested, I'll send you the materials and the details, and you can have a free hand. Let us hear. Scotty. Well, Everett was delighted, of course. He felt some nostalgia for his pulp days, and he had always admired Allard's genius in transforming visions of cosmic horror into convincing prose. He wrote Brandon an enthusiastic reply. He spent hours rereading the stories for inclusion, making notes and preliminary sketches. No squeamish sub-editors to offend here. Scotty meant what he said. Leverett bent to his task with maniacal relish. Something different, Scotty had asked. A free hand, he promised. Leverett studied his pencil sketches critically. The figures seemed headed in the right direction, but the drawings needed something more, something that would inject the mood of sinister evil that had pervaded Allard's work. Grinning skulls and leathery bats? Pah, trite. Allard demanded more. The idea had inexorably taken hold of him. Perhaps because Allard's tales evoked the same sense of horror, because perhaps Allard's visions of crumbling Yankee farmhouses, the depraved secrets, so reminded him of that spring afternoon on Man Brook. Although he had refused to look at it since the day he had staggered in, half dead from terror and exhaustion back in 1942, Leverett perfectly recalled where he had flung his notebook. He retrieved it from the back of a seldom used file. He thumbed through the wrinkled pages thoughtfully. These hasty sketches, made a quarter of a century ago, reawakened the sense of foreboding evil, the charnel horror of that day. Studying the bizarre lattice patterns, it seemed impossible to Leverett that others would not share the feeling of horror the stick structures evoked in him. He began to sketch bits of stick lattice work into his pencil roughs. The sneering faces of Allard's degenerate creatures took on an added shadow of menace. Leverett nodded, pleased with the effect. Some months afterward, a letter from Brandon informed Leverett that he had received the last of Allard's drawings and was enormously pleased with the work. Brandon added a postscript. For crying out loud, Cullen, what is with these insane sticks you've got poking up everywhere in the illos? The dang things get really creepy after a while, man. How on earth did you get onto something like this? Leverett supposed he owed Brandon some explanation. Dutifully, he wrote a lengthy letter, setting down the circumstances of his experience on Man Brook, as we have discussed earlier, omitting only the horror that had seized his wrist in the cellar. Let Brandon think him eccentric, but not a madman and a murderer. Brandon's reply was immediate. Cullen, your account of the Man Brook episode is fascinating and incredible. It reads like the start of one of Allard's stories. I've taken the liberty of forwarding your letter to Alexander Steffroy in Pelham. Dr. Steffroy is an earnest scholar of this region's history, as you may already know. I'm certain your account will interest him, and he may have some light to shed on the uncanny affair you went through. Expect first volume, Voices from the Shadow, to be ready from the binder next month. Pages look great. Best, Scotty. The following week brought a letter postmarked Pelham, Massachusetts. A mutual friend, Prescott Brandon, forwarded you a fascinating account of discovering curious sticks and stone artifacts on an abandoned farm in upstate New York. I found this most intriguing and wonder if you can recall further details. Can you relocate the exact site after 30-some years? If possible, I'd like to examine the foundations this spring, as they call to mind similar megalithic sites of this region. Several of us are interested in locating what we believe are remains of megalithic construction dating back to the Bronze Age, and to determine their possible use in rituals of black magic as in colonial days. Present archaeological evidence indicates that circa 1700 to 2000 BC, there was an influx of Bronze Age peoples into the Northeast from Europe. We know the Bronze Age saw the rise of an extremely advanced culture, and that as seafarers they were to have no peers until the Vikings. Remains of a megalithic culture originating in the Mediterranean can be seen in the Lion Gate in Mycenae and in Stonehenge, in dolmens, passage graves, barrows mounds throughout Europe. Moreover, this seems to have represented far more than a style of architecture peculiar to the era. Rather, it appears to have been a religious cult whose adherents worshipped a sort of Earth Mother, served her with fertility rituals, sacrifices, and believed that immortality of the soul could be secured through interment in megalithic tombs. That this culture came to America cannot be doubted from the hundreds of megalithic remnants found and now recognized in our region. The most important site to date is Mystery Hill in New Hampshire, comprising a great many walls and dolmens of megalithic construction, most notably the Y Cavern Barrow Mound and the sacrificial table. See enclosed postcard, please. Less spectacular megalithic sites include the groups of cairns and carved stones and mineral mountains, subterranean chambers with stone passageways such as at Petersham and Shutesbury, and uncounted shaped megaliths and buried monks' cells throughout this region. Of further interest, these sites seem to have retained their mystic aura for the early colonials, and numerous megalithic sites show evidence of having been used for sinister purposes by colonial sorcerers and alchemists. This became particularly true after the witchcraft persecution drove many practitioners into the western wilderness, explaining why upstate New York and western Massachusetts have seen the emergence of so many cultist groups in later years. Of particular interest here is Shadrach Ireland's Brethren of the New Light, who believed that the world was soon to be destroyed by sinister powers from outside, and that they, the elect, would then attain physical immortality. The elect who died beforehand were to have their bodies preserved on tables of stone until the old ones came forth to return them to life. And we have definitely linked the megalithic sites at Shutesbury to later unwholesome practices of the New Light cult. They were absorbed in 1781 by Mother Ann Lee's Shakers, and Ireland's putrescent corpses was hauled from the stone table in his cellar and buried. Thus, I think it probable that your farmhouse may have figured in similar hidden practices. At Mystery Hill, a farmhouse was built in 1826 that incorporated one dolmen in its foundations. The house burned down around circa 1848 to 55, and there were some unsavory local stories as to what took place there. My guess is that your farmhouse had been built over or incorporated a similar megalithic site, and that your sticks indicate some unknown cult still survive there. I can recall certain vague references to lattice devices figuring in secret ceremonies, but I can pinpoint nothing definite. Possibly they represent a development of a cult symbol to be used in certain conjurations with it. And this is just a guess. I suggest you consult Waite's ceremonial magic or such to see if you can recognize similar magical symbols. I hope this is of some use to you. Please let me hear back. Sincerely, Alexander Steffroy. As noted, there was a postcard enclosed. A photograph of a 4.5-ton granite slab ringed by a deep groove with a spout identified as the sacrificial table at Mystery Hill. On the back, Dr. Steffroy had written, "You must find something similar to this. They are not rare. We have one here in Pelham, removed from a site now beneath Quabbin Reservoir. They were used for sacrifice, animal and human sacrifice, and the groove is to channel blood into a bowl, presumably." Lever dropped the card and shuddered. Dr. Steffroy's letter reawakened the old horror, and he wished now he had let the matter lie forgotten in his files. Of course, it couldn't be forgotten, even after 30 years now. He wrote Dr. Steffroy a careful letter thanking him for his information, adding a few minor details to his account. This spring, he promised, wondering if he would keep the promise, he would try to relocate the farmhouse on Man Brook. However, spring was late that year. It was not until early June that Colin Leverett found time to return to Man Brook. On the surface, very little had changed in 3 decades. The ancient stone bridge yet stood, nor had the country lane been paved. Leverett wondered whether anyone had driven past since his terror-sped flight 30 years ago. He found the old railroad grade easily as he started downstream. 30 years, he told himself. But the chill inside him only tightened. The going was far more difficult than before. The day was unbearably hot and humid, too. Wading through the rank underbrush raised clouds of black flies that savagely bit at him. Evidently, the stream had seen severe flooding in past years, judging from piled logs and debris that blocked his path. Sketches were scooped out to barren rocks and gravel. Elsewhere, gigantic barriers of uprooted trees and debris looked like ancient, moldering fortifications. As he worked his way down the valley, Leverett realized that his search would yield nothing. So intense had been the force of the long-ago flood that even the course of the stream had changed. Many of the drywall culverts no longer spanned the brook, but sat lost and alone far back from its present banks. Others had been knocked flat and swept away or buried beneath tons of rotting logs. At one point, he found remnants of an apple orchard groping through the weeds and bushes. He thought the house must be close by, but here the flooding had been particularly severe, and evidently even those ponderous stone foundations had been toppled over and buried beneath the debris. Leverett finally turned back to his car. His step was lighter. A few weeks later, he received a response from Dr. Steffroy to his reported failure. "Forgive my tardy reply to your letter of 13 June. I have recently been pursuing inquiries which may, I hope, lead to a discovery of a previously unreported megalithic site of major significance. Naturally, I'm disappointed that no traces remained of Man Brook site. While I tried not to get my hopes up, it did seem likely that the foundations would have survived. In searching through the regional data, I note that there were particularly severe flash floods on the Otselic area in July 1942 and again in May 1946. Very probably your old farmhouse with its enigmatic devices was utterly destroyed not very long after your discovery of the site. This is weird and wild country, sir, and doubtless there's much we shall never know. I write this with a profound sense of personal loss over the death 2 nights ago of Prescott Brandon. This was a severe blow to me, as I am sure it was to you and to all who knew Scotty. I only hope the police will catch the vicious killers who did this senseless act, evidently thieves surprised while ransacking his office. Police believe the killers were high on drugs from the mindless brutality of their crime." I just received a copy of the third Allard volume, Unhallowed Places, a superbly designed book, and this tragedy becomes all the more insuperable with the realization that Scotty will give the world no more such treasures. In horror and in sorrow, Dr. Alexander Steffroy. Leverett stared at the letter in shock. He had not received news of Brandon's death. He had only a few days before opened a parcel from the publisher containing a first copy of Unhallowed Places. A line of Brandon's last letter recurred to him, a line that seemed amusing at the time. Your sticks of bewildering a good many fans, Cullen, and I've worn out a ribbon answering inquiries. One fellow in particular, Major George Leonard, has pressed me for details. I'm afraid I told him too much. Sorry, my friend. He'd written several times for your address, and but knowing how you value your privacy, I told him simply to permit me to forward only correspondences. He wants to see original sketches, I gather, but these overbearing occult types give me a pain. Frankly, I wouldn't want to meet that man myself. Mr. Colin Leverett? Leverett studied the tall, lean man who stood smiling at the door of his studio. The sports car he had driven up in was black, looked expensive. The same held for the turtleneck and leather slacks he wore, and the sleek briefcase he carried. The blackness made his thin face deathly pale. Leverett guessed his age to be in the late 40s by the fitting of his hair. Dark glasses hid his eyes, black driving gloves his hands. Scotty Brandon told me where to find you, the stranger said. Scotty? Leverett's voice was wary. Yes, we lost a mutual friend, I regret to say. But I've been talking with him just before, but I see by your expression Scotty never had time to write. He fumbled awkwardly. I'm Dana Allard. Allard? His visitor seemed embarrassed. Yes, H. Kenneth Allard was my uncle. I hadn't realized Allard had left a family, mused Leverett, shaking the extended hand. He had never met the writer personally, but there was a strong resemblance to the few photographs he had seen, and Scotty had been paying royalty checks to an estate of some sort, he recalled. As my father was Kent's half-brother, you see. He later took his father's name. There's no marriage, if you follow. Yes, of course, Leverett was abashed. Please, find a place to sit down, and what brings you here? Dana Allard tapped his briefcase. Well, something I'd been discussing with Scotty just recently. I turned up a stack of my uncle's unpublished manuscripts, you see. He unlatched the briefcase and handed Leverett a sheaf of yellowed paper. Father collected Kent's personal effects from the state hospital as next of kin. He never thought much of my uncle and or his writing. He stuffed this away in our attic and forgot about it. Scotty was quite excited when I told him my discovery. Leverett was glancing through the manuscript, page on page of cramped handwriting, with revisions pieced throughout like an indecipherable puzzle. He had seen photographs of Allard's manuscripts, so there was no mistaking this, or the prose. Leverett read a few passages with rapt absorption. It was authentic and brilliant. His uncle's mind seemed to have taken an especially morbid turn as his illness drew on, Dana hazarded. I admired his work greatly, but I find these last few pieces, a bit, too horrible, you know, especially his translation of the mythical Book of Elders. It appealed to Leverett perfectly, though. He barely noticed his guest as he pored over the brittle pages. Allard was describing a megalithic structure his doomed narrator had encountered in the crypts beneath an ancient churchyard. There were references to elder glyphics that resembled his lattice devices. And look here, Dana pointed. These incantations he records from Lori Zakros, the Forbidden Tome. Yogoth, Yogosut, Harath, Yagdang. I can't even pronounce them. And he has pages of these things. This is incredible, Leverett protested. He tried to mouth the alien symbols. Yogoth, Nikroth. It could be done. He even detected a rhythm to it with practice. Well, I'm relieved you approve. I fear these last stories and fragments might prove a little much for Kent's fans. Then you're going to have them published? Oh, yes. Scotty was going to. I just hoped these thieves weren't searching for this. A collector would pay a fortune. But Scotty said he was going to keep his secret until he was ready for announcement. His thin face was sad. So now I guess I'm going to publish it myself, in a deluxe edition. I want you to illustrate it for me. Oh, I'd feel honored, vowed Leverett, unable to believe it. I really like those drawings you did for this trilogy. I'd like to see more like those, as many as you feel like doing. I mean to spare no expense in publishing this. And those little stick things you did? Yes. Scotty told me the story of those. Fascinating. You have a whole sketchbook of those latticey stick things, yes? May I see it? Leverett hurriedly dug the notebook from his files and returned to the manuscript. Dana paged through the book in awe. These are totally bizarre, and there are references to such things in the manuscript to make it even more fantastic. Can you, can you reproduce all of these for the book? Well, all I can remember, Leverett assured, and I have a good memory, but want to be overdoing it? No, 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 not at all. They fit into the book, and they're utterly unique. Now, put everything you've got into this book. I'm going to title it Dwellers in the Earth, after the longest piece. I've already arranged for its printing, so we begin as soon as you can have the art ready, all right? And I know you will give it your all. He was floating in space. Objects drifted past him. Stars, he first thought. The objects drifted closer. Sticks. Stick lattices of all configurations. Then he was drifting among them, and he saw that they were not sticks, not of wood. The lattice designs were dead pale substance, like streaks of frozen starlight. They reminded him of glyphics of some unearthly alphabet, complex enigmatic symbols arranged to spell what? And there was an arrangement, a three-dimensional pattern to these, a maze of utterly baffling intricacy. And then somehow he was in a tunnel, a cramped stone-lined tunnel through which he must crawl on his belly. The dank moss slime stones pressed close about his wriggling form, evoking shrill whispers of claustrophobic dread. And after an indefinite space of crawling through this and other stone-lined burrows, and sometimes through passages whose angles hurt his eyes, he would creep forth into a subterranean chamber. Great slabs of granite a dozen feet across formed the walls and ceilings of this buried chamber. Between the slabs of other burrows pierced the earth. Altar, like a gigantic slab of gneissic rock, waited in the center of the chamber. A spring welled darkly between the stone pillars that supported the table. Its outer edge was encircled by a groove sickeningly stained by the substance that clotted in the stone bowls beneath its collecting spout. Others were emerging from the darkened burrows now that ringed the chamber, slouched figures, only dimly glimpsed and vaguely human, and a figure in a tattered cloak came toward him from the shadow, stretched out like a claw-like hand to seize his wrist and draw him toward the sacrificial table. He followed unresistingly, knowing that something was expected of him. They reached the altar, and in the glow from the cuneiform lattices chiseled into the nice slab, he could see his guide's face. A moldering corpse face, the rotted bone of its forehead smashed inward upon the foulness that oozed forth. And then Leverett would awaken to the echo of his own screams. He'd been working too hard, he told himself, stumbling about in the darkness, getting dressed because he was too shaken to return to sleep. The nightmares had been coming every night now. No wonder he was exhausted. But in his studio, his work awaited him. Almost 50 drawings completed now, and he planned another score. No wonder the nightmares. It was a grueling pace, but Dana Allard was ecstatic with the work he had done, and Dwellers in the Earth was waiting. Despite problems with typesetting, with getting the special paper Dana wanted, the book only waited on him. Though his bones ached with fatigue, Leverett determinedly struggled and trudged through the graying night. Certain features of the nightmare would be interesting to portray. And now the last drawings had gone off to Dana Allard and Petersham. Leverett, 15 pounds lighter, gut-weary, converted part of the bonus check into a case of good whiskey. Dana had the offset presses rolling as soon as plates were shot from the drawings. Despite his precise planning, presses had broken down. One printer quit for reasons not stated. There had been a bad accident at the new printers, seemingly innumerable problems, and Dana had been furious at each delay. But production pushed along quickly for all that. Leverett wrote that the book was cursed, but Dana responded that a week would see it ready. Leverett amused himself, aside from his case of good whiskey, in his studio constructing stick lattices and trying to catch up on his sleep. He was expecting a copy of the book and received a letter from Dr. Steffroy. I've tried to reach you by phone the last few days, but no answer at your house. I'm pushed for time just now, so I must be brief. I've indeed uncovered an unsuspected megalithic site of enormous importance. It is located on the estate of a long prominent Massachusetts family, and as I cannot receive authorization to visit, I will not say where. I have investigated secretly, and quite illegally, for a short time one night and was nearly caught. I came across references to the place in a collection of 17th century letters and papers in a divinity school library. Writer denouncing the family as a brood of sorcerers and witches, reference to alchemical activities and other less savory rumors. And he describes an underground stone chambers, megalithic artifacts, etc., which are put to foul usage and diabolic practice. Just got a quick glimpse, but his description was not exaggerated. And colon, in creeping through the woods to get to the site, I came across dozens of your mysterious stick figures. I brought a small one back and have it here to show you. Recently constructed, exactly like in your drawings. With luck, I'll gain admittance and find out their significance. Undoubtedly, they have significance, though these cultists can be stubborn about sharing their secrets. I'll explain my interest in scientific and no exposure to ridicule and, well, see what they say. Get a closer look one way or another, and so I'm off. Sincerely, Dr. Alexander Steffroy. Leverett's bushy eyebrows rose. Allard had intimated certain dark rituals in which the stick lattices figured, but Allard had written over 30 years ago, and Leverett assumed the writer had stumbled onto something similar at the Man Brook site. Steffroy was writing about something current. He'd rather hope Steffroy would discover nothing more than an inane hoax. The nightmares haunted him still. Familiar now, for all that their scenes and phantasms were visited by him only in dream. Familiar. The terror that evoked was undiminished. Now he was walking through a forest, a section of hills that seemed to be close by. A huge slab of granite had been dragged aside, and a pit yawned where it had lain. He entered the pit without hesitation, and the rounded steps that led downward were known to his tread. A buried stone chamber leading from its stone-lined burrows. He knew which one to crawl into. And again the underground room with its sacrificial altar, its dark spring beneath, and the gathering circle of poorly glimpsed figures. A knot of them clustered about the stone table. As he stepped toward them, he saw they pinioned a frantically writhing man. It was a stoutly built man, white hair, disheveled, flesh gouged and filthy. Recognition seemed to burst over the contorted features, and he wondered if he should know that man. But now the lich with the caved-in skull was whispering in his ear, and he tried not to think of the unclean things that peered from that cloven brow, and instead took the bronze knife from the skeletal hand, raised the knife high, and because he could not scream and awaken, he did with the knife as the tattered priest had whispered. And when after an interval of unholy madness he at last did awaken, the stickiness that covered him was not cold sweat, nor was it nightmare, the half-devoured heart he had clutched in one fist. Leverett somehow found sanity enough to dispose of the shredded lump of flesh. He stood under the shower all morning, scrubbing his skin raw. There was a news item on the radio. The crushed body of a noted archaeologist, Dr. Alexander Steffroy, had been discovered beneath a fallen granite slab near Watling. Police speculated the gigantic slab had shifted with the scientists' excavations at its base. Identification was made through personal effects. When his hands stopped shaking enough to drive, Leverett fled to Petersham, reaching Dana Allard's old stone house about dark. Allard was slow to answer his frantic knock. Good evening, Colin. What a coincidence you're coming here just now. The books are ready. The bindery just delivered them. Leverett passed past him. We've got to destroy them, he blurted out. He'd thought a lot since morning. Destroy them? Destroy the books. There's something none of us figured on. These stick lattices, Dana. There's a cult, some horrible cult. The lattices have some significance in their rituals. Dr. Steffroy hinted once they might be glyphics of some sort. I don't know. But the cult is still alive. They don't want their secrets revealed. They killed Scotty. They killed Dr. Steffroy. They're on to me now. I don't know what they intend. They'll kill you to stop from releasing this book. Dana's frown was worried, but Leverett knew he had not impressed him right away. Colin, this sounds insane. You really have been overextending yourself, you know. Look, I'll show you the books. They're in my cellar. Oh no, the cellar. Leverett let his host lead him downstairs. The cellar was quite large, flagstone, dry. A mountain of brown-papered bundles awaited them. Put them down there where they wouldn't knock the floor out, you know, Dana explained. They start going out to distributors tomorrow. Here, I'll sign your copy for you. Distractedly, Leverett opened a copy of Dwellers in the Earth. He gazed at his lovingly rendered drawings of rotted creatures, buried stone chambers, stained altars, and everywhere the enigmatic latticework structures, and he shuddered. Here you go. Dana Allard handed Leverett the book he had signed. And to answer your question, Colin, they are Elder Griffiths. But Leverett was staring at the inscription in its unmistakable handwriting. For Colin Leverett, without whom this work could not have seen completion. H. Kenneth Allard. Not Dana Allard. Kenneth Allard. Allard was speaking now. Leverett saw places where the hastily applied flesh-tone makeup didn't quite conceal what lay beneath. Yes, glyphics, symbolic of alien dimensions, inexplicable to the human mind, but essential fragments of an evocation so unthinkably vast that it is miles across. Once before we tried, but your iron weapon destroyed part of Althal's brain back then in 1942. He erred at the last instant, almost annihilating us all. Althal had been formulating the evocation since he fled the advance of iron 4 millennia past. And then you appeared, Colin Leverett, you with your artist knowledge and your diagrams of Althal's old symbols that we thought were all lost. And now 1,000 new minds will read the evocation you have returned to us. Unite us with our minds as we stand in the hidden places, and the great old ones will come forth from the earth, and we, the dead who have steadfastly served them, shall be masters of the living. Leverett turned to run, but now they're creeping forth from the shadows of the cellar, as massive flagstones slid back to reveal the tunnels beyond. He began to scream and scream as Althal came to lead him away with his crushed-in face. But now Colin Leverett could not awaken, for he was not asleep. He could only follow. So that's Styx, precursor to Blair Witch Project. I've not seen Blair Witch Project, though I hear this is remarkably similar in ways. Now, see what I tell you. We finished early, 3 minutes early. Yeah, I thought we were going to finish about 15 minutes early. However, so this is the time that I say, if you're going to run and scamper, go for it. We're going to be on, the story will be on Story Lake Radio YouTube channel. But the next story is such a good one. And if anybody has the patience to stick around and indulge me, I would really, really like to share this with you. And no harm, no foul if you run away. And if I'm causing you a great problem by sticking around, don't stick around. Go have fun. Do whatever you're going to do. But we are going to tell the next story. We push forth. So, seeing no objections or approbations or acceptance of the inevitable, we're starting on to the next story, Fear of Fallen Leaves. I think you'll like this one. It's particularly, well, you'll see. It's set at Halloween, for one thing. Autumn is the most difficult for obvious reasons, Marilyn says. I always dread the end of summer. Some mornings, it's all I can do to make myself leave the house. The others offer their usual looks of sympathy. A young lady whose name she can never remember dabs at her eyes with the tissue. Marilyn thinks the sweater she's wearing ought to be a crime. Candy corns and pumpkins in a gaudy checkerboard pattern. I hate this time of year. I hate it. Even now she imagines she can hear the source of her distress outside, rustling, sighing, crackling like the flames of a constant struggle burning inside of her. And then she's done talking. She shrugs. I know they can't hurt me. I know it's ridiculous. Ha ha! No one's here to judge you, says Evan, the leader of her support group. I once met a man who had an irrational fear of ladybugs. Ha! Remember, you're talking to a guy who's terrified of tall people. They all laugh. With him, never at him. Marilyn's eyes meet those of a man named Marcus, who sits directly across from her on the other side of the circle. His phobia is of big, shaggy dogs. She quickly looks away. Marilyn finds him incredibly handsome, and such thoughts disturb her. Brian hasn't even been in the ground a whole year. She stares off toward the refreshment table at the back of the room, a coffee maker, packets of non-dairy creamer, a few stale donuts on a paper plate, and a new addition, presumably donated by one of her group mates since their last meeting, a ceramic jack-o'-lantern full of peppermint puffs. And she notices the bowl sits on a bed of fake autumn leaves. Well, that's just disrespectful. Evan checks his watch. Well, folks, we have about 10 minutes left. Who would like to share next? I see a new face or two. A woman in a Keith Urban t-shirt holds up one chubby hand. My name is Celia. I'm afraid of spiders. Welcome, Celia, the others say in unison. Everyone except Marilyn, who isn't listening. Just like always, she is already dreading the walk outside to her car. She wonders if she can slip out the back door so she won't have to pass by the man with the leaf blower again. 2 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 2 more days to Halloween, 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 sings the jingle on the television. Some silly horror flick her 10-year-old is watching. She catches a snippet on it on her way through the living room to get the vacuum cleaner out of the closet door. 2 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Don't remind me. Marilyn is sure the song was composed to taunt her personally. I'm trying to forget, as if that will make it go away. She wishes she could crawl under her bed, stay there until October 31st is an X on the calendar and it's time to start preparing for Thanksgiving. But the thought of disappointing her son Joey is just too much to bear. Honey, turn that off, will you? You know scary movies give you nightmares, just like Orlando. Once upon a time, that wasn't true. Joey used to watch them with his father at every opportunity. After what happened a year ago, though, Joey isn't the only one who has trouble sleeping when he watches that tripe. But, Mom, this old dude's using masks to kill all the kids. They put them on, and snakes and spiders come out. Scary movie, off now. She rubs at her temples, feels a headache coming on. Why don't you build something with that Lego set you wanted so bad for your birthday? She doesn't dare suggest he play outside. Not just because of the chill in the late October air. Fine. An exaggerated sigh, Joey turns off the television, stomps down the hall. She smiles as she watches him go. He's a good boy. Her smile disappears at a knocking sound overhead. A muffled smoker's call, followed by a hint of male laughter, a metallic scrape, a heavy thud. It's been like this all morning, as if her home itself is alive. She had hired 2 local men to clean out her gutters, and almost fired them before they got started, as she didn't care for the way one of them looked at her when he said, "Yeah, get you cleaned out good and proper, missy." In that moment, she missed Brian, with an ache that nearly brought her to her knees. And now, 3 hours in, she wonders how something like this could possibly take so long. She doesn't dare peek outside, though, to check on their progress, won't even allow herself to get too close to the windows until their work is done, lest she witness brown horror raining down from above, inches from her face. They can't get off the property soon enough, with them the waste from her gutters. But even the thought of the horrible things burning somewhere, blackening, withering, curling in upon themselves like dying spiders, make her feel no better. Sometimes Marilyn wonders if anyone else in the world knows of her affliction, and they're trying their best to rub it in her face. During a trip to the grocery store on Halloween morning, her Volvo idles at a pedestrian crosswalk in the center of town. A man with a buzz cut struts by wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. The symbol of his favorite team resembles a smear of blood on his chest, a gory handprint left there by the victim of a brutal murder. That makes her think of Brian. She squeezes her eyes shut, curses beneath her breath. You shouldn't say bad words, Mom, Joey scolds from the back seat. The drive home proved no less stressful. She feels a panic attack coming on, considers for a second pulling over so she can dump some of her groceries in the seat beside her and use the bag to keep her from hyperventilating. They are everywhere, impossible to ignore. Other people step over them, sweep them aside, find the wretched things beautiful. Some folks even take photos of them, traveling from neighboring states just to watch them change color. As far as Marilyn is concerned, they are the russet nightmare skittering across every sidewalk, hideous papery shapes stuck like parasites to the hood of every vehicle, remains of a dead season piled in every drainage ditch like casualties of a suburban apocalypse. As she approaches her neighborhood, she spots a skinny teenager working in the front yard of his split-level home. He brandishes a rake like a lazy warrior, half-heartedly swinging his weapon around. Beside him sits a trio of black garbage bags, pregnant with the proof of his labor. Marilyn imagines the bags bursting, spilling forth their contents. The bile raises in the back of her throat. She swings a right under a block, sees Ray and Paula Quinlan's boys jumping into the pile of leaves that have fallen from the giant oak at the edge of their property. The youngest has already donned his Superman costume as if he can't wait a few more hours for the festivities to begin. Watching the little tykes plunging willingly into those vile brown heaps makes Marilyn's skin crawl as if her clothes are infested with bugs. 3 houses down from Quinlan's, Craig Cannon kneels under his carport, filling a leaf blower with gasoline. His t-shirt reads, "This is my Halloween costume." He waves at her as she rolls by. She lifts one hand to return the gesture, but when she sees the countless leaves covering Craig's driveway like a rust-colored quilt stitched together from her worst nightmares, she grips the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turn bone white. If she doesn't hold on to something, she fears she might fall right off the edge of the world. When she passes Tom and Teresa Houston's property, 2 houses down from her own, she swerves, nearly striking a fat orange tomcat sitting on the curb, but she misses and the cat's just fine. For a second, she is sure she sees a pale face leering at her from within a drift of maple leaves beneath the Houston's new deck. Her late husband's face, entombed in a deciduous cocoon. A second glance proves it's only Tom Jr.'s soccer ball, nothing more, just a half-deflated soccer ball. Leaves. Oh, how she loathes them. As she pulls into her driveway at last, she glances in her rearview mirror to make sure none are chasing after her. She knows it's stupid, but she doesn't care. The kitchen smells of sugar cookies and pumpkin spice flavored coffee now. On the radio atop the counter, a commercial filled with cheesy horror movie sound effects advertised a local attraction called the Theater Farm. Joey, honey, could you come in here for a minute? He comes running into the kitchen. Cookies! Awesome, Mom! I am an awesome mom, she quips. He reaches for one, but she gently slaps his hand away. Not so fast. Gotta wait till they're cooled down. Plus, I gotta add the final touch. She paints little Halloween-themed pictures on them using tubes of frosting set beside the stove. We've got vampire bats, ghost, here's an eyeball. This one's supposed to be a goblin, but it didn't turn out so well. It looks like a big green booger, Mom. No offense. You're a big green booger, Joey. She whirls around, pretends like she's going to squirt him with one of the tubes. He giggles, steps out of reach. A lock of wavy blonde hair falls across his forehead. Dang, he looks so much like his father now. Do me a favor, honey. There's a bag from Lehman's grocery in the hall closet. Fetch it for me, please. Sure, Mom. When he returns, he tosses the bag onto the table next to the set of tools they'll use to carve a jack-o'-lantern later. Open it, hun. There's something inside for you. He reaches into the bag and pulls out what she bought for him. Frankenstein! Cool! This is the exact costume I wanted. Of course, I knew that, she says with a wink. And it's Frankenstein's monster, remember? Frankenstein was the guy who made him. Yeah, Mom, I know. Good one. Where most kids can't wait to dress up like Batman, Spider-Man, or the Hulk for Halloween, all her son has talked about for the last month is transforming himself into Dr. Frankenstein's creation. Brian would love that. So does this mean we're going trick-or-treating, Mom? We are. He throws his arms around her. Yay, you changed your mind. But, Mom, aren't you afraid? She holds him close. Her eyes grow wet with tears. I'm always afraid, honey. But I can't let my phobia control my life. That's why I attend those meetings, sweetie. I hope they'll help me one day. Because they're gone, right? Those things, they're gone? She hesitates, but only for a second or two. Yes, they're gone, right? They're gone. Now, her strange condition didn't just start a year ago, but the events of that night didn't help with her philophobia, to say the very least. Halloween was always Brian and Joey's thing. Since the age of 8 or 9, the last time her own parents had taken her trick-or-treating before her father left and her mom quit trying, and she was forced to outgrow such things sooner than most kids, Marilyn didn't care one way or the other about Halloween. She could take it or leave it. Thanks to Brian, though, October 31st was their son's favorite day of the year. To look at her husband with his professional haircut, his corporate lawyer attire, you wouldn't suspect he was a lifelong aficionado of monster movies and slice and dice slasher flicks. The cornier the better. Most attorneys, Marilyn knew, decorated their walls with photos of themselves shaking hands with politicians or shelves full of leather-bound books they would never read. Brian's prized possession? A framed first edition Invasion of the Body Snatchers poster on the wall behind his desk at Thompson, Tierney, and Kreitz. Joey had inherited his father's love of scary movies, much to Marilyn's chagrin. They argued about it on more than one occasion. Godzilla stomping on toy cars and cardboard buildings was one thing. Topless college kids chopped up by machete-wielding madmen was another. Though, tell the truth, if Marilyn could turn back time, she would join Brian on the sofa with a bowl of popcorn big enough to feed a family of 12, and with Joey sandwiched between them, she would watch every bottom of the barrel B movie in her husband's Blu-ray library as long as they could just have him back. But how could they have known on that fateful day 1 year ago that their lives would become a horror movie? That Brian would end up just like the victims in those monster movies he adored so. Joey had insisted on going trick-or-treating dressed like a rotting zombie. Marilyn had asked him more than once if he wouldn't prefer something less gruesome like a cowboy or a scary pirate. She knew she had lost the battle when Brian bought an old flannel shirt and a pair of ripped jeans in a thrift store on his way home from work. He dirtied them up in the backyard with Joey's help, then grinned from ear to ear as he showed her the results, and as if he had scored $1 million lotto ticket instead of someone's musty-smelling second-hand clothes. Perfect, right? Tell me the kid won't look like he just crawled out of the grave, Brian said. Yeah, Joey giggled. It'll be perfect. Even as she rolled her eyes, Marilyn couldn't help but smile. Daddy dressed up too, of course. She was tasked with applying their makeup. Fake blood, cracked yellow teeth, green flesh oozing with latex sores. When all was said and done, she was actually quite proud of her work. She squealed with mock terror as the decaying duo lumbered after her to Brian's Volvo. Brains, the tall zombie grunted, and the short one followed suit. Brains, his trick-or-treat bag bouncing against his bony hip. They set out a couple hours before dark. The streets of their hometown were filled with miniature superheroes, ninja turtles, Disney characters, and adult chaperones of the same. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned from porches beneath strands of blinking orange lights. Motion-activated skeletons mocked their victims in canned stentorian laughter. Brian and Joey lurched down the sidewalk from house to house, while Marilyn followed behind them in her Volvo. Each time they approached a home with its porch light on, the universal sign that those inside welcomed trick-or-treaters, she pulled over to wait at the curb. Brian's love of Halloween was not the only reason she stayed in the car while he did the footwork with Joey. As she cruised down the block, the abundance of fallen leaves everywhere she looked kept her in a constant state of anxiety. She was like a bullied child, forever on the lookout for her tormentors. Her pulse quickened when she spotted a lone yellow dogwood leaf dancing along the sidewalk behind her son as he approached the Quinlan's place. That little yellow leaf appeared to be chasing after Joey. Gooseflesh broke out in her forearms any time she saw a bunch of them raked into piles like burial mounds in the middle of someone's yard. Still, she pushed her fear to the back of her mind, forced herself to enjoy the evening with her family as much as possible. Before long, Joey's trick-or-treat bag bulged with so much candy it would take him months to eat it. As she rolled to a stop in front of a house with a for sale sign in the front yard, she decided to ask Brian if they could call it a night after this. She'd been listening to a collection of Elton John's greatest hits as she drove. She paused the CD now so she could hear her husband's reply through the open passenger side window. And that was when she heard the first scream. So did the stooped old man, dropping a handful of Tootsie Rolls into Joey's bag. The senior citizen stepped out on his front porch, rolling a small oxygen tank behind him. What in tarnation is that? Marilyn peered through the windshield into the twilight. The air had an odd pinkish hue, making the scene before her appear more surreal. At the end of the block, several hundred feet in front of the Volvo, a big woman flailed about beneath a giant oak tree, swinging her arms as if performing a maniac's dance. The three children with her, a chubby vampire, a miniature witch, and a pint-sized Hulk, bawled in terror and confusion as they watched. It looked like the woman was being attacked by a swarm of leaves. An invisible ice cube slid down Marilyn's spine. Brian and Joey ran across the yard back toward the Volvo. Dad, what's wrong with her? Joey asked. I don't know. Get in the car, son. I'll be right back. Marilyn leaned across the street, popped open the passenger side door. Mom, I'm scared, Joey said, climbing in. What's wrong with that woman? Brian, where are you going? Marilyn called to her husband. He sprinted past the car. She needs help, honey. Brian! She gave the Volvo too much gas. It shot forward. She slammed on the brakes. The tires protested with a short squeal. Everything was happening too fast. She eased her foot off the brake, idled toward the intersection at the end of the block. She called out to her husband again. Something to her left caught her attention. Helena Tennant, head of the PTA of Joey's school, thrashed from one side of the front porch to the other, shrieking in horror and pain. Those leaf things were attacking her, too. They flitted around like a flock of small brown birds possessed by demons. Helena crashed into the massive jack-o'-lantern sitting atop her porch railing and smashed onto the ground in a gooey orange mess. She followed a few seconds later, turning her ankle and striking her concrete walkway face first. The creatures covered her instantly, darkening her flesh like living shadows. Oh, crap, said Marilyn. Joey started to cry. Oh, Mom, what's happening? More screams echoed throughout the neighborhood. Another group of trick-or-treaters, 2 young women and 6 or 7 small children, staggered across the street further up. At first glance, it appeared as if they were all trying to rip their own hair out. A mother in a glow-in-the-dark boo skirt batted at her face and chest. Another lost her pointy witch's hat as she fled from the creatures in pursuit. A toddler in a baggy Spider-Man costume tripped and fell in the middle of the road. One of the things darted under his mask with twitchy bat-like movements. A bigger boy in a Captain America costume tried to help the toddler to his feet, but a moment later he was rolling about in agony too as the monsters converged upon them. Marilyn heard gunshots from the next street over, 3 in rapid succession. Bang, bang, bang. A man's voice shouted hoarsely from somewhere behind her. Look out, Martha! Look out! His screams ended in a grotesque gurgle. Trying not to panic, Marilyn eased the Volvo to stop beside Brian and the crowd under the oak tree. The big woman and her young wards were now dark shapes crumpled on the grass a few feet away from a faux cemetery erected in someone's side yard. Their bodies undulated ever so slightly as if covered with a living blanket. Otherwise, none of them moved. Brian, please get in the car, Marilyn yelled. Daddy, Joe sobbed. Then the things were on Brian. They were a dark rust color, almost but not quite star-shaped, not much larger than the hand of a human adult. Something about the way they moved reminded Marilyn of flying squirrels or stingrays, the way they glided effortlessly through the air from one victim to another. But mostly, they looked like leaves. It was as if her phobia had come to life. It had grown fangs, and it was hungry. Two of them stuck like flying leeches to each side of Brian's face, another to his neck, and yet another wrapped itself around his left wrist. He swatted at them, knocked one away, but it was replaced by three more. He fell to his knees. Their flat brown bodies swelled as they sucked his blood. Marilyn had never heard her husband scream before. He sounded like a little girl. She screamed with him as she watched him die. They got Dad, Joey cried. We have to help him. Tears streamed down Marilyn's face. It was too late for Brian. She knew that. She had to protect her boy. Roll up your window, Joey. When he didn't respond, she pushed a button on her side and did it for him. One of the creatures slammed into the window inches from Joey's face. It left a thin smear of blood on the glass where it stuck, the blood of one of its victims. In the center of its maple leaf-shaped body, its round, lamprey-like mouth worked furiously. Marilyn glimpsed hundreds of tiny, needle-sharp teeth. And just as suddenly, the thing was gone, as if it had lost interest in them. What are they? Joey wept. Mommy, are they monsters? She didn't reply. She peered through the windshield, her vision blurred with tears, and she saw that Brian's body was covered with them now. He lay on his stomach, half in and half out of the road. He twitched once, then lay still. Marilyn slammed her foot down on the gas, no clue where she was headed. She just had to get away from here. Now. They were everywhere. Anyone who had not found shelter was food for these invaders. They floated down from the heavens by the hundreds, darkening the twilight sky. They descended from the trees, attacking men, women, and children on both sides of the street. Marilyn saw Steve Thompson, Brian's boss, thrusting a snow shovel at a swarm of them as they cornered him against the storage shed out back of his place. A young couple dressed like Dracula and a sexy gypsy fell beneath the monsters on the front lawn of their three-story home. Amidst the elaborate decorations on their patio, a flickering strobe light gave their demise an eerie, silent film quality. In another yard, a muscular man in Gold's gym tank top pried one of the things from his face, but his flesh came with it. Another leaf creature slid behind his features, and Marilyn saw his eyes turn brown. She suspected the things hunted by sight, with only the dumbest of animal intelligence, as the only people who survived their attack were those who found shelter by fleeing into their homes or jumping into their vehicle. Once there was any sort of barrier between the beasts and their prey, they seemed to lose interest immediately. Marilyn watched as the kid in a Darth Vader costume pulled a plastic swimming pool on top of himself to get away from a horde of the bloodsuckers. Once he was hidden from beneath it, they abandoned their pursuit, soaring across the street to attach themselves to other victims. We've got to call for help, said Marilyn. Hand me my cell phone, baby, in my purse. Joey's hands trembled as he dug it out and handed it to her. Marilyn heard the wail of a siren a second before she rolled through the intersection, and the ambulance struck them on her side. The door crumpled in on her left arm, and the Volvo was thrown violently to the right. They spun around once, twice. She lost count. And from millions of miles away, she heard Joey scream with her. Broken glass sprayed across her face and lap. They finally stopped spinning when they crashed into another car parked against the curb. Something hissed under the Volvo's hood. She was pretty sure her left arm was broken. Her head felt as if it had been stuffed full of cotton. She smelled blood and burned rubber, heard voices, incomprehensible murmurs like music heard through water. Joey, honey, are you okay? I think so, he said, blinking. They fell into each other's arms. Blood trickled from a small cut in Joey's cheek, but he didn't appear to be seriously injured. By force of habit, he had buckled his seatbelt as soon as he climbed into the Volvo. Good boy. He was such a good boy. Ma'am, are you okay? The deep male voice said. Marilyn flinched, turned to the source of the voice, and as she did so, her entire left side felt as if it had been doused in gasoline and set on fire. She winced. Two paramedics were looking in on her, trying to open the door. One of the men had a thick black beard with blood in it. The other barely looked old enough to drive. You rolled right through the stop sign, ma'am, said the young man. I never even saw. And then the paramedics weren't there anymore. They were on the ground, covered with those leaf creatures. Their white uniforms are now the color of rust, moving rust. Mommy, what are we going to do? Joey cried. We have to run for it, hon. We have to get help. She winced again as she fought to open the door. It wouldn't budge. Try yours. Stuck. Try the back door on your side. Can you do that for me? He climbed over the seat, opened it with some effort. She followed. Every movement was agony, but she couldn't fail him now. They fell from the car. They ran through a small park at the edge of a dying neighborhood, past a picnic table, across a basketball court. 3 young men lay beneath one of the goals, their bodies covered with bloated bloodsuckers, and past the boundaries of the park. Right away, Marilyn wished they had stayed in the car. They were exposed out here, vulnerable, but they wouldn't have been safe for long in the Volvo with its busted windows. Those things might have gotten inside. They would have been trapped. She had to find help, find someone who knew what was going on, someone who knew how to deal with this, whatever this was. She risked to look back over her shoulder. At least a dozen of the creatures flew through the air toward them in a deadly phalanx. Less than 30 feet away, closing fast, she'd brought them to a dead end. They were cornered now. A split rail fence marked the edge of the park. On the other side of it, a row of birch trees lined a small ravine. At the bottom of the ravine was a thick bed of dead leaves, perhaps as deep as Joey was tall. She swallowed a lump in her throat. Oh my. The drop appeared to be 12, 15 feet at most. It was their only chance, though. She recalled how the one creature had lost interest when Joey rolled up the window, as if, once the glass was between them, it no longer knew they were there. She thought of the kid crawling beneath the plastic swimming pool and how the thing seemed to forget about him once he was out of sight. She took Joey's hand. They climbed over the fence. We're going to jump, babe. You think you can do that? He stared up at her, his expression of terror morphing into one of disbelief. Into the leaves, Mom? Are you sure? Into the leaves? I'm sure, baby. I can do this. We have to do this. We have to. Oh, okay. 1, 2, 3, go! They leapt into the ravine. As soon as they hit the bottom, harder than she'd intended, and if her left arm wasn't broken before, there's no doubt in her mind that it was shattered now, she started pulling them on top of her with her good arm, covering herself and her son with hundreds of leaves. Joey helped. Darkness consumed them. Marilyn's greatest fear tickled, scratched, poked, and scraped at her face, filling her nostrils with the smell of dirt and compost. She was inside of them. They were inside of her. She could taste them. She shivered, said a silent prayer. She pleaded to let them live through this, let them survive this ordeal with her sanity intact. Later, when she thinks back on everything that had happened, she's thankful that at least the first part of her prayer was answered. She doesn't know why she told them. She certainly hadn't planned to. Maybe it was something to do with the almost intoxicating sense of self-confidence she's felt since facing her fear, since she took Joey trick-or-treating 1 year later after thinking she could never do that again. Perhaps she believes she's finally found a family as screwed up as herself, a safe place where people will not judge her. She expects, no demands, unconditional sympathy here. Here in this room full of men who tremble in terror at the sound of someone snoring, women who break down sobbing at the side of an escalator, and couples whose debilitating fear of germs brings them to each meeting with rubber gloves on their hands, their faces hidden behind surgical masks. And so, there never was a word about it in the media, Marilyn explains. It was all covered up somehow. It was like our little town was just wiped off the map, and those of us who survived it, they did something to us to make us forget it all. But it didn't take with me for some reason. I remember everything. As far as where those monsters came from? Oh, no, maybe they were aliens from another galaxy. I just don't know. They didn't look like anything I've ever seen on this planet. Well, except for... She shudders, trailing off, not willing to say the word leaves. Anyhow, I'm not sure knowing would make it any easier. When she finished sharing her story, the other members of her support group just sit there, staring at her. Evan's lips part, but he doesn't say anything for a minute or two. The expression on his face resembles that of a man trying to assemble something complex, but discovering the instructions are written in a foreign language. Toward the end of Marilyn's story, he took a piece of hard candy out of his pocket, popped it into his mouth. She can see it sitting there on his tongue. The quiet couple always sit in the back, whisper something to one another, and snicker. A senior citizen in a silvery tracksuit who often shares stories about his aversion to aerosol cans clears his throat in an exaggerated manner. Marcus, the guy who Marilyn usually finds so attractive, covers his mouth with one hand as if fighting an urge to break the awkward silence with a deafening guffaw. um, okay then, Evan finally says. The candy clicks against his teeth. Marilyn gathers up her purse, excuses herself, knowing she said too much. Marilyn has never needed a therapist or some high-priced shrink to help her figure out where her philophobia originated. She's always known that. It started with an incident that occurred when she was 6 years old. Her parents had left her in the care of her older brother Billy for a few hours one morning. When Marilyn accidentally broke one of Billy's toys, he held her down, shoved handfuls of muddy leaves into her mouth. She swallowed some of them and was subsequently sick for days, little bits of leaf and grit coming out of her body from both ends every time she ran to the bathroom. Billy's long dead now, buried in a grave upstate that she visited only once after his OD on pain pills when she was in high school. Marilyn imagines him lying beneath a thick brown blanket of the things that scare her the most, and she feels no guilt for appreciating the poetic justice of such a scene. 30 years later, the assault is her most vivid memory of him. As bad as her fear of leaves has always been, it's worse than ever since the night Brian died. Her greatest fear lurks in every lawn, darkens every ditch, blows across every backyard, as if they gathered one by one to outnumber the human race. Marilyn knows the leaves didn't kill her husband, of course. That's silly. Still, at first glance, the demon's camouflage was infallible. The monsters that took Joey's father away looked just like the autumn leaves. And so the question is never far from her mind. What if it happens again? Here in this town where she's attempted to pick up the pieces of life and make a new home for Joey, what if they come back, a second wave, hungrier than the first? If she has no choice but to leave the house and walk among the fallen leaves, she'll remain vigilant just in case. When the world turns green again, vibrant, reborn, alive, she can relax. But only a little bit. Meanwhile, Marilyn watches the skies, always looking up if they should fall upon us again.